Welcome back to the podcast with me, Pete Tigers. Where did that trout season go? Not one I'd rank as memorable, but I still found lots to enjoy, and the company, of course, was everything. And so on to today's guest. I thought I'd take you to the wilderness of Alaska and ask someone along who spends his time guiding and looking after the guests at his fishing lodge there. I'd like to welcome Wayne McGee to this episode of the podcast. Wayne, it's great to have you along. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing great. Thank you, Peter, for having me on the show.
Not a problem at all. Where are you at the moment?
Well, I'm actually sat beside a little creek in northwest Indiana. We just left Alaska 3 days ago and joined a buddy on a small creek called Salt Creek. We just watched a guy catch a 16-pound brown trout, so back on the water already.
Geez, that's a big fish even by Alaskan standards, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it was quite a surprise. I guess there's some Chinook salmon that are coming into the streams out of Lake Michigan right now, and so a buddy of mine wanted to go fishing. I thought I'd come and tag along.
And that's the ultimate fisherman for me, that you're working in fishing the whole time and you're back and you've travelled a little way, yet you're sitting talking to me at the river right now. So I can say that the passion burns brightly with you still.
Oh, I love to fish, yeah. Yeah, I mean, today's just about meeting up with a childhood friend and catching up after the 4 months of being up in Alaska. We just finished our 9th season.
Wow, well, I'm looking forward to learning a whole lot more about that. But I wanted to learn a little bit more about yourself. And you said you're in Indiana at the moment. Have you always been a traveller by nature?
Well, I guess you could say that since I left home at 18. We've been to quite a few different far-flung places around the globe. Been living in the UK, actually, for the last almost 29 years. Work brought me there from Africa, where I went after my sophomore year at university. So we lived in Africa for many years, and then been in the UK. But every year we go up to Alaska for 4 or 5 months of the year to operate our lodge there on the Alagnak River in Bristol Bay, Southwest Alaska. And at the moment, my life does involve maybe a little bit more travel than I would like. I've been caring for my elderly father during the off season. This is where he lives, not far from where I grew up, actually, just outside Chicago, Illinois.
And has fishing always been a part of your life?
I can say it's something I always had a great deal of fond memories surrounding. From the time I was a young lad, my dad would take us fishing, mostly just, with conventional bait and bobber, for panfish in the Midwest, maybe largemouth bass. In particular, I remember whenever we go down to visit my grandmother in central Illinois, farmlands there was a reservoir that we would go and fish at. And we'd go out in the garden, dig up a can of worms and take sometimes even just a cane pole and a bobber and sit on the side of this reservoir and catch bluegills and sunfish, maybe bullhead, and if we were lucky, a largemouth bass. And a lot of good memories, surrounding that. But the type of fishing that, I kind of spend most of my time doing now, I didn't start doing until I was in my 30s when I went up to Alaska for the first time with my father.
We're going to come on to Alaska shortly, but I wanted to also get a comparison of the fishing that you're talking about there that you grew up with, comparable to the UK. Do you get to fish much in the UK?
I haven't. I've been there for almost close to 3 decades now. I have got to do a little bit of fishing. Most of it's the kind of paid stock trout lakes like Deaver Springs or Avon Springs or, those type of places. But, quite honestly, once I started fishing Alaska, I got spoiled. So it's been hard to be motivated. I've had the privilege of fishing, in Scotland a little bit, some of the Scottish rivers, the Tweed and the spay and the Inverkirkeg. There's been quite a few, and I've done pretty good on grills. Haven't caught any particularly large Atlantic salmon. Um, Also fished a little bit in Ireland when I've been over that way for sea trout and Atlantic salmon as well. But there's really nothing I haven't done any of the course fishing in the UK, which would probably be most similar to what I grew up doing.
And I guess those numbers of salmon that you've chased in Scotland and Ireland are slightly different to what you're used to in Alaska.
Yeah, it's been tough, I guess. So much of Northern Europe for the Atlantic salmon, but we're fortunate in Alaska to be in an area where it's still very pristine and in many respects like it has been for millennia. We get between 4 and 6 million salmon that come into our river alone every season. 5 different species of Pacific salmon. So yeah, it's easy to get spoiled there.
And you say it's a really unspoilt part of the world. And it was a question I was going to ask you a little bit later. But, with ecosystems as they are, is that the sort of place that if something was going to start to go wrong, that you would see it there pretty quickly? And since you've been going there, have you noticed any changes, or does it remain consistent?
Well, I guess I've been going to Alaska now for the better part of over 20 years. And yeah, certainly certain parts of the state have experienced some declines. South central Alaska, southeastern Alaska. We're in a part of Alaska where there's not a lot of civilization, no pollution, no dams. And the runs have remained pretty strong, apart from the king salmon perhaps, which seem to, we've seen a decline in king salmon numbers, I would say, and that's been the case across the entire state. Many of the king salmon fisheries have faced closures, to even sports fishing. But fortunately, our river never has, and we still do get a significant run of king salmon as well, but far fewer than the other 4 salmon species. So we're on a wild and scenic river, which is a designation in the United States of pristine watersheds that have no interference from mankind in any way, that are, in their original state, and it's a type of national park designation. And the Alagnak River, where we're at, was one of Alaska's first 5 designated wild and scenic rivers. So we have kind of a privileged situation there where we're remote and we haven't really seen the impact that has affected a lot of other fisheries.
I've been doing my research before we started recording and watched a number of videos of the fishing up there. And it, like you say, wilderness is, I'm sure, a word that you're incredibly used to. But for listeners, some people listening may never get the chance to visit there. But I wondered if you were able to paint a picture of how Alaska looks to you, and for our listeners to get a sense of the vastness and, of course, the fishing.
Well, Alaska is a huge territory. Alaska was the United States' 49th state, I think, one of the last ones to be incorporated in the United States of America. It's separated from the lower 48 by Canada, so it's just a huge wilderness area and much of it is, roadless as well. So the access to a lot of these areas is very difficult. And there's just miles and miles of rivers and lakes and shorelines. The fishing opportunities are limitless in many ways. But for example, to come to us, you would have to connect through Anchorage. And it's about an hour flight in a commercial airline to get to the town of King Salmon. And that entire flight, you're flying over a part of Alaska that has no roads. There's no other way to get there. And so that insulates us, I guess, from a lot of things. And we're surrounded by what's known as the Katmai National Park and Preserve. Many people, although they may not recognize the name, they've probably seen images from there. When you see the bears sitting on the waterfall and watching the salmon jumping over the waterfall, to head up to their spawning grounds, and the bears are eating them. That is in the Katmai National Park, and our property is surrounded by the National Park and Preserve. So we have literally millions of square miles of pristine, roadless wilderness and one of the last truly intact ecosystems, in the northern hemisphere.
And you talked from a fishing perspective as well. You talked about the 5 salmon species, the Pacific salmon. What else do you have there, though?
Well, our clients can target, we say, 10 species of game fish. We have the Chinook salmon, of course, which are the largest, getting up to as big as up to and over 50 pounds. And then we have the coho salmon, or silver salmon, as they're also referred to. We have significant runs of all 5 species of Pacific salmon, including the pink salmon, which come in on even numbered years like this year. So there were a lot of pink salmon in the system this year, whereas next year there'll just be a few. Chum salmon as well as, and then the sockeye, which are the most numerous. We had in excess of 3.5 million sockeye swim right past the lodge this year on their way to reproduce, and long may that continue. But we also have rainbow trout. It's a wild native trout. We have a particular variety which is incredibly stunning. We call them leopard rainbow trout because they have extra spots, and just an absolutely gorgeous fish, and perhaps my most favorite to target. We have Arctic grayling as well, Arctic char, Dolly Varden, lake trout. And if someone wanted to catch a northern pike, we could make that happen as well. Although we're not particularly a pike fishery, and I wouldn't encourage anyone to come to us for that. And then I guess if you wanted to just tick off species, you might catch a whitefish as well. So that would make it 11.
That's a really, really nice mix to play with. And I guess for you as well, and for people coming to visit you, that keeps it interesting too.
Well, there's a lot of variety. There's a lot of variety of species. And there's certain times of the year that we call multi-species weeks, especially late July and early to mid-August, when some clients can catch all 5 species of Pacific salmon in a single week. It's not unusual, especially on even numbered years, to catch all 5 species in a single day. We'll have multiple guests that do that every year. And I even had one angler from the UK that came in 2022, just a couple of years ago, that caught all 5 species of salmon in a single pool.
Wow.
Without moving. Now that I don't believe I've ever heard of that happening before, but it did on that particular day. And then with the trout and the grayling and the char, we can use different techniques. We're fishing in different kind of settings. The river is very dynamic. It's a braided river where we have literally, multiple channels where the river just branches out into various channels. And in fact, the name of the river, Alagnak, in the native tongue, means the river of mistakes, or the river of wrong turns, because you can end up going down the wrong channel and get yourself into a lot of difficulties. So there's a lot of variety, from big channels to small stream-like conditions that our guests can experience even in the course of a single day.
Wow. And what do most people come for? Is it the salmon?
Well, I have to say that probably most people are coming to Alaska for the first time in particular are interested in the kind of the whole package, where they get to go after some of these salmon that are coming into the system. Different salmon come in at different times in the season. There's different peak weeks for different varieties of fish. So most people are wanting to see the bears as well, which tend to be numerous, especially during the sockeye run, which is their main food source. And it's not unusual for us to see 25 to even over 40 unique bears a day during most of the month of July. And so the bears aren't there if the salmon aren't there. But then you have those hardcore guys that really just want to go after some of the big leopard rainbow trout. So I guess it really just depends on what people are after. But yeah, most of our guests are wanting to be there when the salmon are in and the bears are on the river as well, because that's a highlight to their time. To watch the bears catching salmon themselves is quite incredible. Get to share the river with these amazing creatures.
Wow, that sounds absolutely amazing. And I wanted to move on to the trout a little bit because you talked about these beautiful leopards, and I've seen pictures on your pages and what I've been watching earlier as well. How do you fish for those primarily?
Well, the best time we have trout that are resident in the system all year long, and the river's closed to fishing until June the 8th. That's to protect the trout while they're spawning earlier in the spring. And if people are interested in trout, I tell them that for us in our location, the best time to come is in June, opening week, second or third week of the season. So those last 3 weeks of June is typically going to be the time of year when you're going to have the largest average size of fish and probably catch the most fish. And your question was, how do we fish for them? At that time of the year, we're primarily swinging streamers using sink tips. I like articulated leeches, articulated sculpin patterns in black or olive, Dalai Lamas as well. And we're using sink tips and bigger, heavier flies. And the trout are where they're supposed to be because there's no salmon that are in the river at that time. The salmon haven't started to come in until later. The very end of June and beginning of July is when we start to see the first salmon appear. So you fish for them in classic techniques with a swung fly. You can also dry fly fish for the trout. Now, I wouldn't say that we're a prolific dry fly fishery. There's just so much subsurface food available. But we are also a world-class grayling fishery, and the grayling do like the dry fly. So, oftentimes we're fishing dry fly for grayling with a 4 or 5 weight, fishing a caddis or a stimulator or something like that. And you can have a 26, 27-inch leopard rainbow grab your dry fly, and that's a lot of fun as well. But my favorite way of targeting rainbow trout, especially in June, is a technique that we call mousing. And so it's a mouse pattern which imitates the lemmings, which are a small rodent that are up in that area. And these trout are accustomed to eating them when they fall into the river. And you skate the fly on the surface, and it can result in some dramatic topwater action with really savage takes, or having a fish waking behind your mouse pattern and hitting at it 3 or 4 times before it finally grabs it, and then you feel the weight of the fish and you lift into it, and then it's a lot of fun.
That sounds amazing. That was what I was going to ask you next about mousing, and the video I watched before we spoke as well. That the guys were catching grayling on mouse patterns as well. Do you experience something similar?
Yeah. In fact, I've caught multiple grayling on mice. They don't tend to hit as often, but every now and then you do catch a grayling on mouse. I've caught char on mice. I even caught a lake trout on mouse. In fact, this year, because we tend to actually, we release most of the fish we catch, all the rainbow trout and grayling, char we release. But lake trout, oftentimes we'll retain those and then can't bring them back, for appetizers, to be made by our chef. But I tend to open up the bellies of the lake trout because they're voracious feeders, and they eat a lot of our rainbow trout, which is another reason why we're not opposed to dispatching a couple of them every now and then. And I found 3 lemmings in the belly of this lake trout that we had killed this year. So yeah, you don't know what you're going to get.
You mentioned also Dolly Varden, and for listeners, can you explain to them what a Dolly Varden is?
Well, Dolly Varden is a migratory char that comes in from the ocean to back into fresh water. So quite similar, I guess, to brown trout and a sea trout, or rainbow trout and steelhead. So your Arctic char are resident fish that live in the lakes and rivers, and then your Dolly Varden will come in from the ocean. And they're beautiful. They're a beautiful fish. A lot of people like to tick them off their list of species caught because, especially in the fall, in August and September, the males in particular will really get some, incredible colors, and their spots, really start to show, and they'll develop a kype as well. It looks like they're wearing lipstick, actually. So they're quite an exotic fish to catch.
Yeah, I think that's one that I've read a lot about, but want to hear some more. And it would be very rude of me before moving on, because we're entering into grayling season now, and it'd be very rude of me not to ask you the sort of sizes of grayling that you're catching, just to whet everyone's appetite a little bit coming into our grayling season.
Well, I think I used the word world class grayling fishery a little bit earlier, and especially in June, but really all season long. You can target grayling, and oftentimes catch 20, 30 or more grayling. On dry flies, or later in the season on beads that imitate the eggs that the salmon are dropping and the resin fish are eating. But we are very fortunate to have not just a lot of grayling, but significantly large grayling by most people's standards. It's not unusual to catch 15, 16, 17-inch grayling, with multiple grayling in excess of 18 up to 20 inches being caught most weeks. And then the largest I've ever personally caught is 22 inches. So, yeah. In fact, I was fishing in June for rainbow trout and had a big Dalai Lama pattern on, and had seen this subsurface kind of structure that I thought might be holding fish. And the first drop over the ledge as the fly swung down below me, I got you know, a really vicious grab, and I was sure it was a big trout. It ended up being a 22-inch grayling that ate a Dalai Lama. So, yeah.
And so, what I'd love to do is get the guide's eye view of this, because from a fishing perspective, it's clearly paradise. From a guide's perspective, it's paradise. But as a guide, can you have too much of a good thing, or it's just so good it doesn't matter?
No, I mean, I guess that's kind of the general perception that Alaska, oftentimes I hear from European guests or anglers that Alaska's too easy. But it's still fishing. You have your tough days and your tough weeks, and there are some fluctuations. And depending on the week you're there, whether the run's late or early, or just not as good as we would normally expect. So I think probably one of the biggest challenges as a guide is tempering people's expectations, and turning tough days into fun days, on the river. And I think that's where perhaps we do have a little bit easier in many places, because of the variety of fish and the options that we have and the sheer numbers of fish that are in the system, but also just the scenic nature of where we're at. Um, you know, we have a saying that you'll see more bears than people. We have the fortunate position of being, far removed from most of our competition. You're not competing with other boats or operators on the river, other guides. We're at mile 52 on the river, so that means we're 52 miles from salt water, from where the river enters the estuary in Bristol eventually into Bristol Bay. But then we have miles of river upstream of us as well. We're 6 miles below the confluence of two rivers that form the southern and northern branches of our system that go on to two large lakes. And then there's the famous trout fishing waters of the Katmai, which are all our headwaters, the tributaries that feed the lakes and feed our system. So, it's just an incredibly wild and scenic river. No matter where you cast your eyes, you're looking at, just incredible, landscapes, and no people around. I mean, literally, you have the sense that you have the whole river to yourself every day. Even when the lodge is full, which is most weeks, especially in July and August, when we're running 20 to 24 guests a week, you're going out two people on a boat, and the only other anglers you see is the person you're sharing the boat with. You get miles of river to yourself every day. And unless we're going down to Tidewater, which is a longer boat ride downstream when the salmon are first coming in, oftentimes we'll go down and fish the bars down in Tidewater for fresh salmon that just come in on that tide. Uh, we'll encounter some other boats there because we're not the only lodge on the river. There's another small camp, probably about 8 miles downstream for us, and then three other lodges, 25, 40, and 45 miles downstream. And they rarely come up into our section of the river. So, making an average day into a great day is a lot easier because, the setting really, you may see moose, you will see bears and eagles. This year, I saw a couple of things I'd never personally seen before in all my years in Alaska. I actually encountered a wolverine and a lynx as well. So, we'll see wolves and foxes, otters, beavers, mink. So, there's always something that keeps people interested. And, of course, the anticipation of what the next cast is going to bring.
And coming back to the guiding as well, it sounds fabulous, the things that you get to see just on a daily basis. But, we talked about that, standing in that river with a few fish, but you've explained eloquently why there are challenges with it on a day-to-day basis. But how does that feel when you see somebody hook into their dream salmon, trout, grayling, char, dolly? How does that feel?
Oh, of course, it's thrilling. It used to be that it was hard for me to be on the water and not be fishing myself. And fortunately, I have a number of guests, especially return guests, that have become friends, and we want to fish together, and I get to fish occasionally. But yeah, typically, I get as much or more joy seeing our guests, get into good fish it brings back the memories of what it was like for me when I first went up there to Alaska before we owned the lodge, and we count it a real privilege actually get to introduce people to this very special, magical part of the world.
So I wanted to move on a little bit, and you've segued it beautifully for me. Why Alaska? Why did you end up there? What took you there in the first place?
Well, yeah, I can't really put my finger on it, specifically, but from a very young age, I was fascinated with kind of wild, remote parts of the world, wildlife, and Alaska, for some reason, always kind of was, featured in my mind and thoughts, some places I wanted to go. My father and I used to talk about doing a once in a lifetime trip to Alaska, but life takes different twists and turns, and I didn't get up there until I was in my mid 30s, and my dad and I went on a raft trip. Uh, I had done a lot of research leading up to going there. It was a big deal. I had been waiting till I could afford it when I realized that if I waited till I could afford it, I probably wouldn't be doing it with my father. And so I had just remortgaged the house and released some equity and had a little bit extra cash in the bank account and decided that this was the time. So we went up there. And I had chosen to go to another river, which is a few watersheds north of where we're located now, but in the Bristol Bay area, because Bristol Bay, Southwest Alaska, is synonymous. If you're wanting to go to Alaska, I would encourage it, whether you come to us or one of the many other reputable lodges in the region. Bristol Bay is really the mecca of salmon and trout fishing in Alaska. You can go a lot of other places and experience some good fishing, but no place has the kind of remote, pristine environment and the sheer numbers of fish that Bristol Bay has. And all those salmon support the local resident fish like the rainbow trout and char and grayling. So, we were supposed to fish this other river, but when we flew into Dillingham, we got stuck there for 2 days because of weather. And we weren't able to fly out because you had to get through two different mountain ranges, and the pilot said it wasn't possible. So, we're sitting there watching our week, evaporate and, not on the water and not able to get to where we wanted to go. Well, finally, the pilot said, the forecast isn't looking any better, but if you want to change plans, you've got all your gear. You're doing a raft trip. If you want to change plans, I can drop you off on another river this afternoon. You can be fishing. So rain was coming down horizontal. We got in the plane, loaded up, landed on this little alpine lake on a different system than what we had ever even considered. Unload the plane, set up camp. Everything was sodden from the first moment. All of our clothes and sleeping bags were soaked. And my dad's first cast into the river with a spinning rod, because he's a spin fisher, produced a 26-inch rainbow trout. About a half hour later, I had 2 or 3 to hand, looked up, and there was a sow with 2 cubs, a bear with 2 cubs watching me from the other side of the river. The rain was still coming down horizontal, and I thought to myself, you know what? Once will never be enough. I was hooked. Despite the challenges that we had faced and the conditions that we were in, we went on to have a fabulous week. I think we caught 3 different species of salmon that week, together with trout and char and grayling. And I was already dreaming about the next time I would come back. And I was hooked, and so there's lots of places that I would love to go and fish around the world. But I kept coming back to Alaska, and that once in a lifetime trip turned into once will never be enough, turned into an annual pilgrimage of 1 week, which eventually became 2 weeks, and then 2 trips of 2 weeks each. And then after a while decided, you know what? I think it's time for us to maybe make a change. And, I started looking for lodges. And for 8 years, I kind of scoured the market. Not that I could afford it, to be honest with you. It was just a dream. But every lodge that came to the market, I looked at it from afar, and I even visited 3 or 4 in person when I was up there. But none of them ticked all the boxes. Wrong location, too busy of a river, too small, too big, and too expensive. But then, just it seems as if it was meant to be. When the time was right, the right opportunity presented itself, and we happened to be in the right place at the right time, and found out about the place that we're at, registered our interest, and about a year and a half later, we were the new operators there and been there for 9 seasons now. Just finished our 9th season.
Wow. Well, that's a lovely part of background for all of this. And there's so many questions that you brought up from that. One of those things that you talked about, the lodges, and I often think a lot of hotels, certainly in the UK, are always up for sale quietly or on the marketplace. Is it similar with lodges, or do lodges stay with their owners for quite some time until it's time for them to move on and perhaps retire, or a change in circumstances?
It's kind of hard to say. I don't really know a lot about a lot of the other histories involved in the other lodges. At any given time, there could be a handful of lodges on the market. Some of them probably change hands more often because, of obvious reasons, not the right location, or maybe the river has changed. Um, our predecessor had been there for over 20 years, and now we've been there for going on 10 years since we bought the business. So, there's a lot of lodges in Alaska. There's just so much fishing. But that's kind of a hard question for me to answer, about the turnover rate of lodges. I think most of the more reputable outfits have been around for a long time.
Yeah. How did that feel when you were handed over the keys, when the lodge became yours?
Well, I have to say, the first time that we flew in to take a look at it, we landed on the airstrip that overlooks the property, because that's the only way you can get to us. There's no roads to us. Once you get to the town of King Salmon, after that 1-hour flight from Anchorage, it's another 20-minute flight to our private property. We're 160 acres surrounded by the Katmai National Park and Preserve. And the first time I stepped off the plane, within the first 30 seconds, I kind of knew I'd found what I was looking for. And in my spirit, I staked my claim. And so after a year and a half of negotiations and ups and downs, we finally were able to close the deal. There were moments when we despaired that it wasn't going to happen, and I remember when the opportunity first presented itself, I started to put a business plan together, not because I expected to be able to finance it or actually, do it. but I didn't want to regret not having tried. And as I mentioned before, it was like as if it was just meant to be, because within 24 hours of putting the business plan together, we were 100% financed. And now it's like, oh, wow, I guess we have to do this. And then the reality set in. But there was also a sense of relief because there had been a lot of ups and downs in the process of, closing the deal. So, yeah, it was truly kind of a dream come true type of situation. And by grace of God, we've managed to, establish a thriving business there within the first. By our third season, we were already running over 90% capacity and haven't looked back really. I mean, COVID took the wind out of our sales there for a couple of years, but fortunately, we were in a strong position, have a great client base, and the river keeps bringing people back. So, things have bounced back really well. And yeah, just to think that when I wake up every morning and look out over the river to the mountains on the horizon, that is the view that we get to say is ours. It's our home away from home for 4 months of the year every year.
It's an amazingly gutsy move. And of course, there's an element of risk in there, but were you leaving stable employment to live your dream and take this on? Was it a difficult one? I know that you're a family run business as well, that your son's out there and of course your wife. And was that easy to do?
Well, we've never really kind of followed conventional um, paths in our life choices. I mean, we lived in Africa for many years, and uh, kind of always ever worked for myself. So things have never been considered stable or secure. And I've always been someone that follows my heart. And, I've done things that I thought that I wanted to do and pursued things that were of interest to me. So, yeah, it was daunting, but at the same time, it just felt right, and yeah, I just feel fortunate, to be honest. Feel very fortunate to have a family that also supports, this type of thing. To be able to work with my son, who's a full partner in the business. He's our pilot as well. I took him up to Alaska when he was 18 years old on my second trip, kind of a father and son trip, this time with my son instead of with my father. And I ended up leaving him there because the lodge we went to had actually had a fire and they needed help cleaning up and rebuilding. And he ended up staying and helping them and then coming back and started to guide for them. And that's all he's ever done since he's been 18 years old. So, I couldn't do what we're doing now without him. He has a lot more his fingers on the pulse of the day-to-day operations, where I'm really more kind of the figurehead of the company. I deal with the marketing and the communication and admin. Of course, I'm on site and host people and guide as well, but wouldn't be able to do it without Jacob. And now his wife has joined us as well. He got married a little over a year ago. And then my wife, Sue, has been with us from the beginning, together with my youngest son, who was 18 years old when we started our first season there. And he's our kind of camp manager, overseeing the physical plant. And my daughter even worked with us for 4 seasons before kind of establishing her own life back in the UK with her partner and child and home in Wiltshire. So it has been a family affair.
And does that make it much easier as well that the team, the nucleus of the team that you have are your family? So that must make for a much smoother running of the business, both internally and externally for guests to see too.
Well, one of the things that is remarked upon oftentimes is the family feel. people feel like they're part of the extended family by the time they leave because we care. And I think probably the greatest strength that being a family-run business offers us is that our our livelihoods depend on this, and so there's a sense of ownership and responsibility that you can't pay someone to have. And so it's all hands on deck. When something needs to be done, you can count on them to muck in and get stuck in and get the job done. And I'm very fortunate to have the family that I have that approach it with the kind of attitude and sense of um, commitment to doing the job right. So yeah, I'm thankful for that.
And I guess there's a lot of stuff, the wonderful scenery, the wonderful fishing, the wonderful food, all of those things that go together. But I guess what is the less glamorous side that people may not see? Is it sort of keeping everything running from a day-to-day basis, making sure the showers were all of those sort of less glamorous things that I guess you have to keep your eye on as well, don't you?
Yeah, well, thankfully, I've got two very capable sons that are really good at keeping those kind of things happening. Uh, I keep my finger on the pulse of how the guests are feeling, and especially the communication process leading up to a booking and after the booking, and more importantly, once they're there. But yeah, the logistics of running such a remote operation of the scale that we do uh, are quite challenging. So everything has to be flown in or boated in. It's 100-mile trip from the lodge into town, 50 miles down the river and 50 miles across Bristol Bay to the town of Naknek, where the port is. So every year, we have to do all of our ordering ahead of time and send a container from Anchorage or Seattle, to the town of Naknek on a barge. And then once that's there, we got to get it all up to the lodge, and then the propane for the hot water and the heater and the stoves, the fuel for the boats or the diesel fuel for the generator. There's a lot of moving parts, and although on the surface it looks like our heads are above water, underneath oftentimes our feet are paddling quite furiously to make it look like everything's running smoothly. So yeah, but this season was fantastic. It's probably our best season ever in many respects. But not only did every week fish exceptionally well, which isn't always the case, uh, but we didn't have any major hiccups or anything go wrong. So you know, it was. I actually feel quite proud of the team, not just our family but our staff. Typically we're running 10 to 12 guides a day, with 10 to 12 boats on the river every day. Sounds busy, but it's not. Like I said, we've got literally 100 miles of accessible water by jet boat. So, putting 10 boats on 100 miles of water isn't that difficult. But yeah, just really thankful for our staff, the kitchen staff, the hospitality staff, maintenance. Everything that goes into making it a quality experience for our guests. Couldn't do it without the amazing team that we've been able to develop over the years.
And you said the fishing season's 4 months long. When are you starting to arrive there to get everything ready for the season? Because in my mind, I guess there's weather that you've got to deal with over winter and stuff like that, maintenance and stuff. How long is that lead in to the start of the season and the first guests arriving?
Well, that actually is one of the greatest challenges that we face, because we have a very short window of opportunity to get things opened up and any special projects that we might have finished before guests start to arrive. With the winter and the thaw and the permafrost that hasn't melted yet, uh, water levels waiting for the snow to start to melt for the rivers to rise. Um, Typically, we'll arrive. We'll have a team with boots on the ground Jacob and Cameron with a skeleton crew of some of our core staff will arrive mid-May, and our first guests arrive on the 7th of June for opening day on the 8th. So we've only got 2 or 3 weeks. But because June doesn't have any salmon yet, we limit the number of guests that time of year. So in June, we only have a maximum of 12 guests a week instead of the 20 to 24 that we'll have in July and August. We also limit it again later in September once most of the salmon are now dead. And so it's back to trout fishing primarily and grayling fishing with only the silver salmon still around. So because we have less people in camp at that time, I'll have extra staff in. We're doing training for new staff. But we're also trying to finish up any construction projects but we do pretty well. I mean, it's all hands on deck, for a hard 3 weeks before guests arrive. But we seem to pull it off every year.
And what do you do over winter? Does anyone keep an eye on things, or how does that work out?
Well, a lot of lodges do require what they call a winter watchman, because of the potential of theft or vandalism. But our location is remote enough that we've never had that issue. So, we bare board the property, which means, there's big sheets of plywood with large nails that have been driven through them that are laid out in front of all the doorways, and we'll bare board the main buildings where we don't want bears to be able to break into the buildings. Winterize everything and walk away and hope when we come back 8 months later it's all still standing.
And when you land, are the fingers crossed as the plane's starting to land?
The first year that we bought the business, it was in the off season that the sale was finalized, November 2015. And I think it was in February of 2016, before we were to arrive, of course, later in May, there was a really significant earthquake that took place. And I woke up that morning seeing on social media feeds cars bouncing up and down in the driveways in Anchorage, and light posts swaying back and forth, and shelves and stores being, toppled over. And that was a couple 100 miles away from the epicenter, where we were only 50 miles away. And so I just had visions of the whole lodge being toppled over and, in the river. And we hadn't even started our first season there. But fortunately, I don't know if it's the geological aspect, nature of the region we're in. The tundra is like a big sponge, actually, a shock absorber. It was about 3 days before I was able to get a pilot to fly over the property and take some pictures to be relieved to see that everything looked like it was still in good shape. And I guess now it's become old hat, 9 years in, we come back and there's some minor things that may need to be addressed, but don't really worry too much about it anymore. But I can remember that first year, really being concerned that here we just made this massive commitment and taking this incredibly large risk, and before we even get there, an earthquake man knocked it all out. But because we are in a seismically active area with volcanoes and earthquakes, so but no, fortunately we don't have much trouble with during the off season. And come back we might have to re-level some of the buildings with the permafrost freezing and thawing. The buildings like to move around a little bit, but it's it's such a remote area that you just can't go around the corner to the local hardware store and get what you need. So.
Fantastic. Well, I'm pleased everything worked out okay for you on that front. I wanted to ask you, would you change anything or advise the Wayne who first took on the lodge on anything?
Uh, you know, I can't say that there's anything that just jumps out. Um, there's challenges that are just come with the territory. So I don't think about. I mean, you can't avoid some of the things that you have to do, whether it's hiring or whether it's just some of the logistics related to running this type of operation. Um, it's been a lot of hard work. It's been a labor of love, but it's also been one that we've been passionate about, and we have been able to forge a livelihood from it that we are very grateful for as well. So, you know, I didn't have a lot of personal experience in this type of industry. I was just a guy who liked to fish, you know, and, but as I've described, fortunately, my son had spent his entire young adulthood doing this very type of thing. So he was very well prepared, perhaps not specifically experienced in a lot of the things that as owners of an operation you have to deal with as when you're working for someone else, but at least he had his finger on the pulse of what's required and had a good problem solving head. And yeah, I just can't say again how much, how thankful I am to have him at my side, because together we do a great job. But I think both of us would struggle without the other because of what we both bring to the partnership. So yeah, if there was anything, I wish I would have done it 10, 15 years earlier. You know, I just turned 60. I'm starting to feel it a little bit in the bones. I'm a little tired right now. It's been a long season. It's 7 days a week. Same planes that bring our new clients in are the ones that are taking the ones out that have just finished their week. So 7 days a week without a break for a 15-week season with guests, and then a few weeks at the beginning of the season and a week or two at the end of the season to wrap it all up. So, just having come back 3 days ago, uh, I'm a little bit tired right now, but I'm already kind of starting to wish I was back there. So, I think that says it all.
That certainly is testament to it. And does it take you, like you say, I guess you're on duty for a large portion of every single day for that series, season, sorry. Does that mean that it takes a bit of time to get out of that rhythm, unwind, reset, and then get yourself ready for the next one?
Yeah, it's always a big adjustment. Like right now, it's just, been full on for, 7 days a week for 4.5 months. And so right now it's just taking a deep breath and, you know, here I am sat on I don't know if you can see it, but I'm actually, sat on the bank of this little creek right here right now. Just, you know, don't have to worry about anything. Don't have to think about anything. Don't have to do anything, So, but there's also kind of a melancholy that comes with, the season coming to an end. You're tired, but you're also kind of bittersweet, you know, not really wanting it to be over, but, thankful for a respite. And it won't be long where I'll be itching and, restless and, you know, already been working on our end of season report to mail out to everybody about how the season finished up. And it's got me thinking about next year and bookings. And, that's what the next few months are going to start to involve. I'll be at the Irish Fly Fair with Stevie Munn in November, and then January, February, and March, pretty much every weekend at different shows around the United States. And then back in April to Munich for EWF, the show there in Germany. And that's what the off season primarily involves for me right now. The last 4 years since my mother passed away, I've been caring for my elderly father in his home back close to where I grew up. And then we go back and forth to visit my kids and grandkids they're living in the UK where we've been for the last 28 years. So there's a lot of back and forth, kind of live out of a suitcase, which that gets old. So in many respects, getting to the lodge, I get a almost 5 month period of time where I'm at one place doing one thing that I love. And that feels more like home than anywhere else right now.
That sounds just about perfect. I'm going to let you, having seen that creek, Wayne turned his phone round and I got a look at it. So I'm not going to keep him too much longer so he can go fishing. But Wayne, the hardest question we have on this podcast is for you to choose a song that we put on Spotify for our Fly Culture road trip mix. Give us a song that sets the tone. Perhaps the boat's going out in the morning. What do you like to listen to?
You know what? It's not that hard of a question because you actually prompted me before you hit record, and I did have a little think about it. I didn't have to think too long. I don't know about anywhere else in the world, but in Alaska, the fish love Bob Seger. I put night moves on, and I'm telling you, the fish start to bite. So that's always on my playlist when I'm in the boat.
Fantastic. Well, that's a good enough reason. So I think we should all put that in our playlist if it makes the fish bite. I'm going to ask Wayne for his contact details. I want to, for transparency as well, say that I invited Wayne along. I wanted to learn a little bit about the fishing there. I wanted to learn about this story of buying a lodge, following your dream. So that's why I've asked him along today. So, Wayne, could you tell us your socials, your website, lodge name, all of those sorts of bits and pieces for people, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of the business is ATA Lodge, which stands for Alaska Trophy Adventures Lodge, but ATA Lodge is a lot easier to remember. You might even think of at a lodge. Uh, so our website is atalodge.com, short and sweet. Our social media handle, I guess, on Instagram and Facebook would be the @ followed by Alagnak River. It's the name of the river. That's spelled Alagnak River. Alagnak River, all one word. And all my contact details are on the website, the bottom of every page on the website, phone number, email. And we'd love to hear from anyone who might be interested in coming and experience a little bit of what we have to offer in our little piece of Alaskan paradise, Bristol Bay.
Fantastic. I'm going to go and have a look at those Dolly Varden. I hope you got some of those up there.
Yeah, there's a couple on our Instagram feed that aren't. You don't have to. I actually during the season I post a lot. I post usually 6 photos, maybe a video or reel every day. So you might have to go down a little bit to find what you're looking for, but they'll be there. Now I'm just back to posting once or twice a day. But I like during the season to kind of give multiple posts in real time of what's happening so people who are coming next year know what to expect the week that they're there. And to drip feed the desire for those that are dreaming about coming to Alaska to someday pull the trigger and come see us there.
Fantastic. Wayne, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And I think it's the first podcast I've actually done with somebody sitting on a riverbank. So thank you for that. I've enjoyed seeing the background. I've enjoyed seeing the river, and I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. There'll never be any charge for these, and I hope you'll continue to enjoy the podcast. There'll be many more coming very, very soon. Thanks so much for listening.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.